All right, now you can do it.
Welcome to N. Greg.
Yeah, that's pretty good. You must have your good microphone on too and stuff like
I
that.
do have my good microphone on.
Because I could totally hear that.
Yeah.
So I'm James Orr, the manly voice. The way you can tell us apart is Brian is the manly voice. That is Brian Williams. Not to be confused with the Brian Williams that misinformed us about important news information. That was
I've never been on a helicopter.
That's right.
Just for clarity, I've never crashed in a helicopter because I've never been on a helicopter.
There you go. Couldn't have been you.
Couldn't have been me.
Awesome. Well, welcome. Thank you for coming on tonight. Tonight we're going over a buying process overview, and it is going to be amazing. So Brian is teaching next week's class, The Silent Killer. What is the silent killer?
CapEx.
Yeah, what is
buying
CapEx?
Low cost houses that don't appreciate. All sorts of things are silent killers.
Yeah, that is true. That's true. So that class is going to be amazing.
That class is going to be amazing. We're going to talk about exactly what I just said. Why maybe buying $30,000 or $60,000 houses that never appreciate in markets where the rent looks really good and the cash flow looks amazing may not be your best plan. And how to hopefully tell the difference between ones that are good and ones that are not.
But Brian, I could get the 2% rule. I mean, it's not even 1% rule. It's like 2% rule. Shouldn't I just go buy those? I guess
absolutely no.
We'll have to find out next week as to why they're not ideal in your mind.
Yes, in my mind. Only in my mind.
Well, I mean, I think there's some pretty interesting things going on there too.
Sure.
So then the class that everyone has been waiting for, although they may not have known.
No one knows they're waiting for it.
Well, I think that's fair, right? I mean, so this class is called Everything You Learned About Deal Analysis is Wrong. Pretty bold statement. And I think it's true. So
everything.
There's not a lot that remains once you add in this whole new thing.
Still have to know how to deal with how am I going to figure out what rent's going to be?
Well, that part, yeah, that's
how do I figure out my insurance is all the rest of the numbers, they're not really changing.
That's probably true. So that is the class everyone has been waiting for. It's the class I've wanted to teach since, I don't know, at least the beginning of COVID, probably before that. But really COVID kind of spurred me along to do it. So it only took 6 months for me to get
244 days or something since the first case of COVID. I don't know.
Hey, there are some classes that I've been talking about for a decade. I'm like, I probably should teach a class on blank. And Brian has been like, yes, you should definitely teach a class on that. And I just haven't quite gotten around to teaching a class on that.
Yeah. Yeah, when are you teaching that psychology inside your head class?
Oh my gosh, I'm not ever teaching that class. That is going to be really scary. It's it's bad. It's bad. It's really, really bad. Okay, so everything you learned about deal analysis is wrong. That is going to be an amazing class. If that happens to be your wedding anniversary, negotiate with your spouse right now to switch it to another night because that is going to be awesome. You're going to want to skip whatever you've got planned. Kids ballet recital, skip it.
Those are all canceled. Don't worry.
Your daughter's graduating from Harvard. Skip that. All the stuff that you think is important, you should skip everything and come to this class. It is going to be that good. And that's on October 7th. And I think that recording, I'm not sure if that's going to be premium or not. My guess is it will be premium. So it's going to be good stuff.
It's a bold move, Cotton.
What's that?
It's a bold move, Cotton.
I don't know.
It's a reference from Dodgeball. Come on.
Oh, I don't remember that reference.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah.
You'll have to go watch it.
I do remember a couple of references from that movie which have not aged well, like the whole scene with Lance Armstrong.
Yes.
So that's what I remember most of Dodgeball. If you could dodge cars, you could dodge balls. I remember that scene.
If you can dodge a wrench, you can dodge a ball.
Yes. Oh my gosh. Okay, so then after that, Brian and I are going to tag team, and I changed this. This used to be Real Estate Investing AMA, and I changed it to Real Estate Investing AMAA.
Absolutely anything.
That's not what I was thinking. I was thinking almost anything because there are some things that I'm like, I'm not sure I want to answer that.
Yeah, whatever you want to ask James and he doesn't want to answer, I'll answer it for him.
Yeah. See, the thing is, I would never do that to you, and that's the challenge.
Oh, I don't know about that.
Yeah, there is definitely some stuff that I would not do. So anyway, that's going to be an amazing class. So if you have questions about stuff, it's not like we don't answer questions for class, but this will
No
be like
doubt.
a full class of just question answering. And then I've got two, because I couldn't, for some reason, get Brian to commit to teaching any classes. I've taken the next two spots too and decided to make them mini classes. So all the power, less time. That's how I'm starting to think about them. And they're going to be a mini class on the ultimate guide to earnest money. So everything you ever wanted to know about earnest money, impact it has on deal analysis, getting deals accepted, all that stuff. It's going to be an amazing class. And then a mini class on the cash flow power meter. You'll learn a little bit about that on October 7th, but you'll learn the rest of it on October 28th.
So our mini class is going to be shorter?
Yeah, probably. Not 6 to 8 as it says on there. I just sort of left that in there. So,
It's a mini class, but it's the same.
Oh my gosh. Oh, yeah. So there you go. We do have a podcast. Oh, this isn't the podcast slide. I thought it was the podcast slide. Oh my gosh.
Do you need me to teach tonight? Because you're a little
start
off.
over. Oh, yes. You probably could teach tonight. Realestatefinancialplanner.com/suggest. If you don't like the classes we've got scheduled, this is your opportunity to tell us what you do want. I did pull those two final classes from this list. So we do use it. And if you vote on stuff, eventually I will come around and teaching it. For example, all of you guys out there that keep on bugging me to teach Nomad by Proxy, if it's not listed on there, it's not happening. So you may want to go vote on the ones that other people have put on there for Nomad by Proxy, because that seems to be the most popular one. All right, so introductions via chat. Here's a pro tip for you, Brian. If you want to actually send me a message during this thing, you should send it to all panelists and attendees. Oh, I need to tell you the story. Were you weren't on the call, the Storytime call yesterday, were you?
I was not, no.
Okay, I had to kick somebody off in the middle of the call.
Wow, really?
Yes.
Why?
Yes. They were soliciting for business in the middle of the presentation in chat. And so I cut them out. So so please don't do that. You will get banned. As evidenced yesterday, go listen to the recording of that if you want to hear it. But it's like me, in stride, being like, Adam, I'm going to ban you right now. You're not allowed to do that. And it was pretty crazy. Yeah, so if you do want to, what's that?
Was it an Adam we know? Or did you just make that name up?
I think it was. It wasn't the Adam we know, but it was an Adam. It was someone I didn't know.
Gotcha.
So, yeah. Yeah, Ashante says, that was awesome, by the way. See, even Ashante says it was great. It was really good. I was mid-stride, and then I got thrown off. I got shooken up. What just happened there? Anyway, so if you want to, in the chat window, please say who you are and where you're from. And since everyone seems to have an excuse anyway, why don't you just tell me what your excuse is for not doing your first deal? Brian doesn't have any excuses. He's actually typed it in there. That's awesome. Yeah, so if you want to in chat, please do that. I should have turned on the AC in my house. It's gotten a little warm. Today was warm in the afternoon. It got hot out. We do have a podcast. There are 40 episodes up there. Realestatefinancialplanner.com/podcast, and you will have access to all of those. And this is my 30-minute break.
30 minutes. Good luck. You don't go far. Welcome to your COVID-19 update. Next slide. Let's see if James messed with my slides today.
I didn't mess with him. I sent you a frowny face instead.
Awesome. So, yes, James sent me a frowny face. I'll explain why in a minute. So, this is the new graph. In case you couldn't tell, around May 24th, June 7th, in that window, that's when we thought it was safe to reopen. And then we had a huge second wave. If you actually look back, this is still part of the first wave, in my opinion. And then we dropped down. And if you were here last week, I don't know why the last week's date is not on the graph. It must have gotten shrunk and cut off. But last week, I basically said we were kind of on our way down, and I was like, yeah, I'm concerned about several things. One, we've got schools going back in person. Two, we had Labor Day. And I don't even remember what the third one was. It was probably just people aren't wearing masks. And look what happened. We're on our way back up. And so the governor in Colorado actually just warned, hey, a third wave is likely to be on the way because of exactly those things. Please wear a mask, be safe, and don't get sick, because this is probably my guess is this is going to curve back up to where we were in July, if not higher. And then we got all sorts of I've seen so many videos of just crazy like amounts of people in one place with no masks. And I'm like, come on, like no social distancing. I'm like, yeah, it's not going to help. So stay safe. Next slide. My property manager sent me some, I think, quite interesting information.
Yeah.
She had attended a property management panel this last week and basically sent me, hey, there's some really interesting legislation that is likely to be discussed in January. The first one is aligning rent payments with mortgage payments.
Hold on a second. Is this Colorado or is this nationwide?
It is unclear to me, but it's at least Colorado.
Okay.
So this is aligning rent payments with mortgage payments, which means that rent payments will be due closer to the 15th. And I don't know about you, James, but I pay my mortgage on the 1st.
I thought the due date was the 1st.
It is the 1st, but like the late period actually extends to the 15th. So it's like hard to actually understand why they would think about doing this. Because in my opinion, this just teaches people to actually pay their bills late. So that would be a horrible decision in my opinion. They're going to standardize late fees and other like kind of payments, which I actually think would be fine. Across the board, hey, if you're late on your rent, it's this much per month, and other payments are this. I don't really have a problem with that one. The last one is also crazy to me, which is using the security deposit to actually pay late fees. And I'm like, in stride or at the end of the lease is kind of the unknown here. And it's like, if it's at the end of the like lease term, fine. I think that's already in place. But if it's like, hey, you have a late fee of $100, we're going to take that out of your $1,000 deposit. No one's going to have any money left to actually pay for what damage deposits are actually meant for.
Right. So they're not going to be able to use, like they're going to replace their security deposit if they use up part of it for late fees as they're ongoing.
Yeah, so it's very vague, right? Like, I don't really know what this one is about because I can think about it multiple ways. It could be you can't use the security deposit to pay late fees at the end of the lease. It could be we're going to pay late fees from your security deposit, but this is the crazy kind of stuff that may be coming in January. So very interesting. Next slide. So delinquency update. You can see from last week, September 16th, we were at 4.4%. Over the next week, we basically dropped to 3.7%. And so we're kind of a little bit above where we were in August and July, kind of at the same kind of point in time. It's hard to tell because they're different dates, but we're kind of approaching, normal, the new normal, where you're going to need more reserves, which James is going to talk about in 2 weeks in his ROIQ plus R trademark.
I will talk about this.
Yes. So, and this is dollars of delinquency. So this is, 3.7% of the dollars the property manager should have collected are not present. Next slide.
So if only we had a visual of this so we could see how we compare.
Yeah, it wouldn't matter because they're on different days. So the next one is delinquency update in units, which is September 23rd shows 6.3%. And September 16th shows 7.7%. And the 6.3% is really down some. It's still not as low as August or July, but it's definitely getting down there. The vacancy rate is 4.42%. They're not counting subleases as vacant. They're typically at 100% occupancy right now. So this 4.42% of vacancy is kind of like an issue. There was a Denver property manager who basically said they had 6% delinquency and 5% vacancy. And so that kind of gives you just another idea that we're in the general ballpark of what's going on in Colorado. I think that's all I have.
Woo! All right, cool. So now the main course in 1 hour and 46 minutes. So tonight we're going to go over the buying process overview. And for some reason, I don't know how this happened. It was not deliberate. It may have been because I was picking like the oldest class we had done, which still doesn't make a lot of sense to me. And I was kind of like replacing some of the most needed but oldest like recordings of things we have. And so I started doing classes based on certain subsections of the entire buying process, when in fact I probably should have done this one first, because this one gives you like the big picture overview of how everything fits together. And I will reference some of the other classes we've got recordings on, because there's no possible way I could reteach closing or reteach contract to close. They were 2 hours each by themselves. So tonight is sort of like Brian and I discussing the entire buying process as an overview. And I'll go deep into certain sections that don't get covered elsewhere. But other times you're going to see a slide that says, there's a 2 hour class on this. Here's the link to go watch a 2 hour class, because it's amazing and you don't have to watch it again. So some of the classes are by themselves. They're kind of like their entire thing. So here are the big picture overview of what's going on. This is the class in like 5 seconds. In order to buy property, these are the steps that I think you need to go through as a real estate investor about to buy stuff. So there's the first meeting you have with your real estate broker, real estate agent, where they go over all the stuff you need to know, all the forms, all the paperwork, all the discussions you have about what you need to know in order to buy property. Then there's all the homework you have, all the stuff that you need to do before you get into the real estate agent's car pre-COVID, or meet them at the property with a mask on and a full body shield if we're doing stuff post-COVID. So all the stuff that you need to do before you actually see properties with your real estate broker. We're going to talk about that tonight too. And then there's the showings. This is when you're out looking at properties, deciding whether this property makes sense, doing deal analysis, evaluating the condition of the property, whether or not it's something you want or not. That's the showing part. Then if you decide, based on the showing part of the kind of process, you want to write an offer, there's the writing the offer part. Then once you get your offer accepted, there's the contract to close part. And then once you actually go under contract and you're through the contract to close period, there's the closing itself. And then there's all the stuff the real estate agent you're working with should be doing after closing for you. And all that is considered post-closing. So let's go over the first meeting. And I'm going to tell you sort of like, what this is sort of like what's the I can't say the inappropriate version about my robe and sort of thing. So this is like the Wizard of Oz looking behind the curtain of what is actually happening with a relatively typical, I think, real estate broker, but realize that this could be different depending on which real estate agent you're working with. And I listened to a recording of this class before I taught the class tonight. And during one of the recordings of class, one of the people on the class recording basically said, James, should I be concerned if my agent didn't do any of this? And I was really reluctant to say, yes, you should be concerned, but you probably should be concerned if your agent's not doing all of this stuff with you, or at least some of it. So it's going to be a little bit different depending on what real estate market you're in and who your real estate agent is. And my process has even changed since coronavirus has kind of hit. Like, I'm not going to Qdoba with clients and sitting down and having chats with them and talking to them about whatever they want for an hour or that. When I used to do that, basically people could schedule themselves on the calendar and we could go have discussions, but that's not happening anymore. So I'm probably making even more changes, partially coronavirus related, partially just phase of life sort of stuff going on for me. And I may talk about that. So Brian, when we first got together, did we have like a lunch at Qdoba where we discussed anything you wanted for 3 hours?
I mean, the first time we discussed anything was not at Qdoba, but
it was at a bar.
A year and a half of lunches at Qdoba after that.
Yeah, but it was like at a bar and after like a meeting or something like that where you wanted to have a beer.
Yeah.
What did I have for drinking at that thing?
I don't know, probably Coke or cherry Coke or iced tea with lots of sugar in it.
So I was all sugared up. So one of the things that happens when I usually sit down with somebody for the first meeting is, we usually meet at Qdoba, historically meet at Qdoba. We walk through the line and we're talking about, how's the weather, what you've got going on. And then by the time we sit down with our burritos, we actually start talking about, what it is that you want to talk about, because it's really open to you. We want to make sure that your most pressing questions get answered when we sit down for the first meeting. And so whatever comes up, can I find these properties? Does house hacking work around here? Can I do Nomad? How do I structure financing? I'm trying to find deals with, that fit the 1% rule, the 2% rule, or the 3% rule, or, can I buy properties with nothing down, or whatever it is that's on your mind that you want to discuss. And then the next thing that I'm really trying to figure out is how much detail do you want? Because if you want me to go and teach a 2-hour class on how to analyze deals at that lunch meeting, it's hard to do, especially if you have other questions about stuff. And so it's this combination of how much detail you need versus how much like broad strokes you want, because a lot of times I could say, okay, you want to learn about deal analysis? Happy to answer any questions you have, but we have like 12 hours worth of deal analysis classes you can go watch. So you don't really need me to teach you deal analysis one-on-one unless you have very specific questions, which I'm happy to do. And then usually I sit down and I give away a couple books that we do. And what books I've given away over time has changed. But one that probably is still relatively current, although this may also be changing, is this book called The Real Estate Northern Colorado Real Estate Advisor. And it's basically all the process for buying a property, all the process for selling a property, a small section on investing, which is just really basic deal analysis, and then a whole referral directory at the back of it for anyone you needed there. And so that's like one of the books that we give away. The other book that most people get a copy of, and usually they would get a copy of these if they came to the real estate investor class the first time. Usually we trade them, they're filling out a form to get a copy of this book, and it's the Nomad book. If they don't have a copy, like if they've never been to a real estate investing class, we usually give them a copy of the Nomad book. And then finally, the book that I've been giving away most recently is the book that I wrote for my son, which is this one, I think it's called How to Achieve Financial Independence and Live Your Passion Regardless of Age or Income. And it goes over a whole bunch of stuff about how to get to financial independence and, buying 20% down properties, buying 5% down properties, paying off debt early, all those types of things. And these are the books that I normally give away. Everyone can get a copy of this now. I decided to post it online. And so you can go to realestateFinancialPlanner.com/book and you can get a copy of those. And then over the years, I've given away other copies of books, and I don't do this anymore, but here's that book that we talked about last week, the 3K book. I found a copy on my bookshelf. Here's another book, which is a Christmas gift we gave away, which I'd also give away like we got together. It's about acquiring a portfolio of cash flowing properties, and it's basically all math and charts. And then finally, this is the last Christmas book. This was like the 440-page tome, and this is all the checklists. And instead of giving people out this huge, monstrous book, which Brian loves to have because he has a copy on his bookshelf, instead of giving out this book, we decided to post all the checklists online, and so people can now access those checklists. So if you were meeting with me for the first time, you'd get usually a copy of a book or two for you to read in case you like to be a reader. Not everyone is. Not everyone will read those books. Some people will. Some people will choose just to go watch the videos or listen to the podcast. Some people will choose not to do any of that. I had a client once, still shake my head, but the client basically told me, I don't read any of your emails. I didn't read any of your books. I didn't watch any of your videos. I figured if it was important, you'd call me. That's not encouraged. And no, it wasn't Brian, in case you're wondering. Well, why are you shaking your arms out? That's
like it would be me.
It wasn't you. In fact, Brian, the funny story about Brian, for those that don't know, Brian went and watched before, like I even had a ton of stuff on all the class recordings up. I had a whole series of videos up my website, and one of all the videos had like this little image of me with like this weird stare on it. And Brian would tell me that he was watching all my videos and I was staring at him and he was getting creeped out by the photo. Is that a true story?
That was off the website.
Right. It was off the website. The crazy picture of me.
Yeah. Cause it looks like you're like this. And it's like, whenever you move, it's like the eyes follow you. It's weird.
Oh my gosh. All right. So basically that's what happens. And then most of the time when we are at a first meeting, we would go over 4 really important documents. So I'm going to take some time tonight to go over these because I think they're extremely important. But these are the 4 different documents we would typically give you a copy of. The definitions of working relationships. And this basically tells investors, for those that don't know, that real estate agents can work with you in one of 3 ways, technically a 4th way, but it's really just 3 ways. They can represent the buyer in the transaction. They can represent the seller in the transaction, or they can act as a referee where they don't represent either the buyer or the seller, but they sort of like make sure that the transaction goes smoothly, but they don't actually negotiate on behalf of either party. So they sort of like play referee to make sure everyone plays fair in that. The 4th one is when the agent represents one party, they treat the other person as a customer. So it's not like that. So the Colorado Division of Real Estate requires we disclose to you those types of relationships, and there's a form we usually give you to do those. And then we have a exclusive right to buy listing contract, which I'm going to go over some details of tonight because it has some super interesting things in there about like what obligations the real estate broker has to you, what obligations you have to the real estate broker, how the real estate broker expects to get paid, and what your obligations are in case you don't buy anything or you cancel your contract or things of that nature. Also goes over whether or not you can terminate the agreement and how that works, and whether the real estate broker can terminate the agreement and how that works. And so there's a whole bunch of things in there that are very interesting that we're going to want to go over, and we'll do that tonight too. Then we're going to spend a little bit of time going over who does what in the real estate transaction. What really does your agent do? What does your appraiser do? What does your inspector do? What does the title company do? What does an attorney do in the transaction? And so go over all the different roles so that you understand who the players are and what they're actually doing. And then finally, because a lot of our clients, even though they may not think they're going to buy new construction up front, a lot of them end up buying new construction because in our marketplace, new construction tends to make a lot of sense. And so we have this special brokerage disclosure regarding new construction where we go over all the pros and all the cons, and there are quite a few cons, a few pros of buying new construction properties and a couple of gotchas. And so we have an attorney prepared version of the brokerage disclosure regarding new construction that we often give away too. So other agents may provide you information about buying and paperwork to be able to work with you. So other agents are going to tell you what it is. So here is typically what we go over in that first meeting. Number one is all that paperwork. We kind of show you what's going on. We don't usually have you sign it at the first meeting. Typically, Tammy prepares that, and we'll send it over via DocuSign. Then we usually go over that professional services provided to make sure you understand what we're doing and what everyone else is doing and who you're going to need on your team to do that. And for me, I've got a referral directory. I give it to you in the book, but we have all of your team members set up so that we know exactly who is going to be doing what, and we can recommend them to you. And I would recommend that you have a real estate agent that can do that for you as well. Find out who they have that could do that. Then a lot of times we're discussing your real estate goals, and I've been struggling with this one recently. There's one of the things that, I used to talk to people a lot about, what are you trying to do? Are you trying to, retire early? Are you trying to, supplement your income? Are you trying to just invest for retirement? What's like your plan and what are you trying to achieve? And I'm realizing that this is an area that I probably could spend a day or two or three diving deep and talking about your specific strategy and all the details and how to optimize and things of that nature. And so historically, this has been a really short, like a really general overview of what you're trying to do. And I'm trying to figure out how much time and how much extra resources we should put into doing these sort of things. And I probably should talk to Brian about some different ideas and see where people are. Did Brian have input on this? I see him, so I'll grab his microphone. So,
I mean, that's what we do in class. A lot.
Like
right?
Go deep with the goals and like what you need and stuff like that, right?
Yeah, I mean, sometimes we do. I mean, when we were still having in-person classes, right, we would actually bring people in and talk to them about their goals so that other people could see an actual example in real life. So I think those are super helpful.
But even then, like I'm thinking of hot seats as an example,
Sure.
where we've had someone come up and, we don't record hot seats because we want to protect people's privacy. We don't want those being recorded so that, someone hears exactly how much someone makes or how much assets they have or how much money they've got in the bank. And so we talk to them about their strategy, but in 15 minutes, there's no possible way we could go deep enough to give somebody like really good advice. And so,
I mean, this would take hours, if not days, to really understand someone's actual portfolio and where they're at and all the nuance.
Yeah, and running math, because I think it's one thing to say, I think this works out better for you, and it's another thing to actually test it and say, this is really what works out better for you, provided these market conditions are true. So there's a lot of thinking that goes on with that, and I think part of it's ongoing, right? Like Brian and I have these conversations about, him and me and stuff like that all the time, but it's impromptu. We're out of the property and he's saying, hey, should I add this? Here's what I'm thinking about. If I add this property, how does it impact, this other thing I've got going on and these other kind of plans I have and what's the kind of like long-term strategy and what should I do with this and where should I come up with down payment or how should I structure loans or things like that.
I don't know that I've ever asked you where I should come up with down payment.
Well, I mean, it's sort of like that.
Yes, I know.
Well, actually,
hold
on one second. To be fair, that has come up one time.
All right, maybe.
Raising money for down payments.
Sure.
Yeah. Okay, anyway. So it's this like ongoing thing. So there's a whole discussion on that. And then there's financing, looking at properties and figuring out like what loans you're going to do. We had a whole 2-hour class and multiple classes on financing. How do you receive the property lists? How do you get the list of properties from your real estate broker? And then how to analyze deals and then writing your offer. So let's start with the paperwork. Here are the forms locally. We'll go over those first. Definitions of working relationships, the exclusive right to buy, the brokerage disclosure regarding new construction, and the professional services. So if you want to see a copy of this, if you happen to be in Colorado, because this is the standardized Colorado form, you could do this. If you happen to be in another state, you're going to want to ask your real estate agent for what their version of the buyer agency agreement is so that they can represent you in the transaction. So you can go to jamesdor.com/exclusive right to buy listing contract, all with hyphens for the second part of it if you want to see a copy of it. Or just go to the Colorado Department of Regulatory Agencies Division of Real Estate website, and you can get a copy of it there as well. So what is it? It is the agreement between the buyers and the real estate broker outlining what you should expect from your real estate broker and what your real estate broker should expect from you. It talks about the compensation for real estate brokers. And let me just be super clear up front about this. The compensation for real estate brokers, it is not set by law, and it is 100% negotiable. So Brian could come to me and say, James, I want you to help me buy a house. And I want to pay you $100 to do that. Not $100 an hour, not $100 per email you send me, which would be a lot of money, not $100 per time we go showing. I want to pay you a flat $100. And I have every right to say to Brian, I love you. I really do appreciate you making me that offer, but I'm going to have to say no. That is not acceptable compensation to me. And I could just as easily say to Brian, I normally get paid 3% of the purchase price when you buy a property. And Brian could say, unfortunately, James, that's not going to work for me. I don't think we're going to be able to work together. And that is completely acceptable. So realize you can negotiate this and do it. Now, as a practical consideration, and for now, and by the way, this may be changing. In fact, I told Brian about this on the phone, I don't know, it was a month ago, 3 weeks ago, something like that. We were talking about some possible litigation going on, which could totally change the landscape, could totally change how all this stuff is going down. But right now, for practical consideration, if Brian wants me to represent him and buy a property, typically he is not going to have to come out of pocket and pay for me to represent him in the transaction, because in almost all cases, the seller is going to be offering a cooperative commission, which means part of the proceeds from the sale the seller is going to receive. Usually it's negotiated, but oftentimes it's 6%, and the seller is going to usually offer half of that, 3% of the purchase price, to the buyer's agent who helps the buyer, brings the buyer and helps the buyer purchase the property. So most of the time this is already pre-negotiated, and so there's no additional fees to be paid by Brian. Now, there are exceptions to that, but on a practical consideration, that's typically how it works. Okay, our normal agreement, the exclusive right to buy listing contract, is by default exclusive and irrevocable, which means you can only have one agreement with one agent, and there's a couple exceptions I'll talk about, and you cannot just cancel it willy-nilly and say, I'm no longer interested in working with you. And I'm going to show you what that means. We'll get to it. There is a period of time that this agreement is in place. It's either the period of time is one of two things. It's either the start date to the end date of the agreement. For example, I could say to Brian, I'm going to help you buy a house from January 1st through June 1st. And so it's in effect for that period. Or, and this is probably the more common one, it's the start date to the completion of the purchase. So it may be, the date on there may be January 1st to June 1st, but if he buys a property on February 15th, then the contract actually ends on February 15th when he buys the property. So if he wants to buy more than one, he would need to actually have two agreements with me. He'd have to have one from January to February 15th, and then another one from whenever we decide he's going under contract on another property, or right after the February 15th to whenever the other one ends, or when the property is purchased. So he would need two separate agreements to do this. So what you're committing to, typically, if you don't make any alterations to this agreement, is you're committing to either one deal or the end date. And you'll need a new agreement for each property that you want to buy. So if you were going to work with me as a real estate broker and I was going to help you buy a house, typically what I do is I put a 1 year period in there. But then I usually handwrite into the additional provisions a clause that allows you to get out of the agreement at any time. Okay. And up until 4 weeks ago, this is the clause I used to put in there. And I'll show you the new clause I'm putting in. So in the additional provisions, we used to say, buyer has the right to change the end date of this agreement in section 3.6 at any time with written notice, email is acceptable, to stop working with the broker. So if Brian says to me, hey, I want to hire you to help me buy a house, and I'm going to do a year-long agreement with Brian, and we go out and we look at 3 properties together, and Brian's like, James is crazy. I mean, he is like, wearing Crocs with socks to showings in the middle of winter with snow. His feet are frostbitten. His car smells like butt. He's got McDonald's wrappers all in the bottom of his car. Let me get a drink here for a second.
Why are you describing our first showing?
Exactly, right? So this is the thing. So like Brian's like, this guy's crazy. If we didn't have this clause in here, the one that says buyer has the right to change the end date, then Brian would be stuck with me for that year. But because we have this clause in here, Brian can say after the showing, hey, James, I think I'm gonna cool it off and not buy a house. Let's go ahead and end the agreement. Then that ends it. Now, you might think to yourself, especially if you're a real estate broker in another market and you're listening in on this, you might think to yourself, why does James just let his clients out of these meetings, out of these agreements like willy-nilly? Can't you force them to go through and buy the property and collect the commission? You could, but here's the problem with that. Brian, where am I going to be for lunch tomorrow at noon?
In your car at Qdoba.
Not in my car, but at Qdoba, right? So if I happen to take a client, which is my normal MO, is to take a client to Qdoba and talk to them about buying real estate, and Brian's all pissed off at me because I won't let him out of an agreement, I'm forcing him to do a sale, how can he get back at me, in quotes, and kind of ruin my business?
I mean, I would just show up here at class.
Right. But I mean, the idea is you can also just go ahead and show up at Qdoba any day at noon because everyone knows I'm there.
Right.
So, or you could also go to class and, spread bad words about, James being a jerk, won't let me out of this agreement. But that's not what we're trying to do. So I'd rather say, totally fair. If you're not happy to work with me, I don't want to work with someone who's unhappy. I'm not trying to force you to buy anything. So I'd rather be able to let you out of the agreement at any time if you want to. If he's happy, he could be worth 1, 2, 3, 5 transactions. I mean, could be like 5 transactions that he would buy with me. Maybe even 6, I mean, for all I know, if he wants to buy 6 properties. But if I kind of piss him off, he's not going to buy any. Okay? That's what I used to use, that clause, and it basically gave the buyer the ability to terminate the agreement at any time. I have since changed it as of 3 weeks ago. The new thing says this: either party has the right to change the end date of this agreement in section 3.6 anytime with written notice. Email is acceptable. Why?
Because somebody pissed you off.
Exactly. Somebody pissed me off. It wasn't that they pissed me off. It was that they were doing things that impacted my reputation because I'm trying to represent them. And I'm following what they tell me. I'm doing as they direct. But they're doing things that are not appropriate. And I'm in the middle of the agreement. And we went back and we reread the agreement. And the way it read, it was gray as to whether or not I could get out because they didn't do anything like illegal. They just did things that were hurting my reputation in the marketplace, which could impact Brian. It could impact other clients that are trying to buy properties. And so rather than hurt Brian and hurt all my other clients because we've got one, not to pick on Brian's t-shirt, but one rogue client that decides to be a little bit off-center, a little bit crazy, we decided, hey, if we're going to give buyers the right to terminate, we should also have the right to terminate as well. And so I think it's only fair. And when I tell clients, I'll say, if you don't like me, you don't even have to tell me you don't like me. Just say, we decided we're going to hold off right now. We're not going to move forward. I'd like to cancel the agreement. That's totally fine. You could say face, you could just say it. Or if you really want to say it, say, James, you're a jerk. I don't want to work with you anymore. The email is fine. But for you, I can also send you an email and say, this isn't really working out. We're going to go ahead and end our agreement. If you want us to refer you to another agent, we're happy to, or find yourself another person to help you buy a house. Okay? So that's how that works now. It's now bilateral instead of unilateral for us to do it. Okay. Interesting stuff. Here's the other part of this. So this is the exclusive right to buy contract. Section 3.4 of the Colorado version, and I'm sure there's versions just like this in wherever you are. Property means real estate which substantially meets the following requirements or is acceptable to buyer. And for us, we usually write in something like residential property in northern Colorado, or properties listed in the MLS in Fort Collins or Loveland or Greeley or whatever cities we're serving, depending on how accurate it is. Or if we're only representing a client for one property, they saw a property in the MLS, they're really not searching, they just happen to see something, we might put in the address of the property here or something like that. So this description, though, covers what the contract you have, the exclusive right to buy contract you have with the real estate agent, and what they're agreeing to help you with, but it also locks you in to those types of properties with working with them. You can't say all properties in northern Colorado with one agent have another agreement that says all properties in northern Colorado without you owing 2 commissions. Pause for dramatic effect. This could cost you a lot of money. If you have 2 agreements that cover the same either geographic area and or property type, and you have those with 2 different real estate agents, if you're under the philosophy, because I know a lot of investors, they're under this kind of philosophy, they want to work with as many real estate agents as they can, so because they think that they're going to get more deal flow, that they're going to get more and better deals if they do that. And so you could go and say, I'm going to sign this exclusive right to buy agreement with you, and with you, and with you, and with you. And now they've got 4 agreements with 4 different agents, and they have this description of properties similar enough that it would be covered by more than one agent. If you go and you buy a property with one of those agents, and the other agent finds out, they could come in and say, this is the description of the property. You actually, you bought a property that met our description. A commission is now due to me. Okay? So be super careful about that. So we may decide to exclude stuff, like in our agreements. We may exclude stuff like for sale by owners, which means if you're going to go do off-market marketing in order to find subject to deals or creative financing or whatever it is, those would be excluded. Or if you had a deal that you found, another real estate broker had like a pocket listing and it really wasn't on the MLS and there was no real easy way for me to represent you on the transaction because it's sort of like a secret, no co-op being offered, and you wanted to buy that property, this would be considered for sale by owner. It's not listed in the MLS, and that could be a transaction that would be excluded from this as well. And things we exclude, cities I won't cover or your agent won't cover. So for example, I'm not going to Longmont. So if you want to buy in Longmont, I'm not helping you there. Or types of properties your agent is not willing or competent to assist you in buying. So I have a client right now, and they're welcome to chime in if they want to on the webinar. I have a client right now looking to lease a commercial building or buy a commercial like office building for their side business. And I don't feel competent to help them with that particular transaction. I don't know anything about those. I don't even know where to begin. I don't have the paperwork to do that. So I am not qualified to help that client. So I would totally exclude that from the paperwork. Okay? So if your agent is not competent, some agents may not feel competent helping you with luxury properties. They may not feel competent with duplexes, triplexes, fourplexes. They may not feel competent with commercial buildings. They may not feel competent with owner financing. I mean, there's all different kind of variations on here where if they don't have the expertise, they should not be signing an agreement to help you do that because they're not trained, and they can get in trouble for doing that. And on that note, if you are looking, to buy a property that is not in my specialization, like this client that wants to buy this commercial office space or rent this office space, I referred them to another agent who does specialize in that. And internally, this is like the opening the robe. I can't say the saying I want to say, although I know exactly what it is. I'm just not allowed to say because Brian won't let me anymore. He won't let me anymore. So I'm not allowed to say that. But behind the robe, kind of like, behind the scenes of what's going on in the real estate agent world, real estate agents can refer one client to another agent and get paid part of the commission that is earned when they go buy a property. And so in this case, I've referred a client to a specialist who does that type of thing. And in theory, there's probably a partial commission coming to me when they go buy a property like an office building or something like that. But I'm not really worried about that. If you want to buy in another part of the country, I can refer you there. And we have like a whole bunch of stuff we give you if you decide to do that. I talk about it, I think, in this realestatefinancialplanner.com/treasure website. It talks about the one treasure chest you get for everybody, and then there's a second treasure chest you get if you get referred. Okay. What happens if a real estate agent is representing the seller and you're interested in buying the property with the same agent? So I hear this all the time. Maybe Brian hears this too. The real estate investor says, hey, I'm going to get a better deal if I go and I work directly with the agent who is already listing the property and representing the seller. Have you heard that before, Brian?
Yeah, absolutely.
And do you think, so what has been your experience with that? Have you had any experience with this?
It typically doesn't happen, right? Because at the time when you, as a buyer, go to find a property, the seller's already signed a contract that specifies what the commission is to the seller's agent. So if they sign a contract that says it's 6% and that seller's agent is giving a 3% co-op to the buyer's agent, now they're just going to be the buyer's agent. They're still going to collect the full 6%. It's not like you're going to be like, well, I'm saving you 3%, so just give that to me off the price. That just doesn't work.
Let's think about this from all three angles. So the seller's agent thinks now that they're getting two commissions, right? Because they think they're doing the job of both the seller's agent now and the buyer's agent. And so they think they're getting paid twice. Yep. The seller who is selling the property says, hey, my agent is going to represent me on this thing. We don't need to pay a buyer's agent anymore. So I'm going to actually save 3%. So I'm actually going to make this money on the deal. And then the buyer thinks, hey, I don't have an agent coming in. I'm unrepresented. So they don't have to pay a buyer's agent 3%. I'm going to save the 3%. Of those three parties, the seller's agent, the seller, and the buyer, who typically wins that? Who is the one that typically ends up not having to either come out of pocket or ends up saving that money?
Whatever the contract says.
Yeah, I will tell you in reality who it typically is. It's usually the agent. The agent already has the agreement in place that says if there's no buyer's agent, I'm automatically getting paid 6%. So it has to be a new negotiation between the seller and the agent in order to make that work. It's not usually the buyer because the agent doesn't represent you. They're not negotiating on your behalf. They are not trying to get a deal and make a deal for you. It is against their fiduciary obligation to do so. The paperwork they have where they represent the seller says that the agent representing the seller has a fiduciary obligation to do what's in best interest of the seller, not what's in the best interest of this new random buyer that walks along and says, hey, I want to buy this property. Can you please help me and help me get an amazing deal by negotiating a 3% discount because I don't have a buyer's agent? It doesn't work that way. Okay? So just be aware of that. Now, is there this one case? You know, is somebody on the call now who says, wait a minute, James, I was able to do this once. Sure. It can happen one time. You know, a property that's been sitting on the market for a long time and they really want to get it sold. And the agent's like, hey, this seller's been a real pain in the butt. I really just want to get rid of this property. I'll take a half commission and I'll give up part of mine in order to make it work. Absolutely, that happens. Not most of the time, though. Okay. So how this typically works, though, for most times is when the agent is here and they are already representing the seller and the buyer wants them to help them buy the property, the agent will say, okay, you know, I've been working where I've been representing the seller this whole time. Now I'm going to change something up. I'm going to say, if I'm already working with the seller and the buyer comes, now I want to switch hats, and instead of representing the seller, I am going to represent neither of you, and I'm going to play referee, and I'm going to just help the deal go through smoothly, but I'm no longer negotiating on your behalf, Mr. Seller. No, I'm not negotiating on your behalf, Mr. Buyer. I'm now going to just help you do this. And so here's how it reads. It says buyer agency unless brokerage relationship with both. If this box is checked, broker represents buyer as buyer's agent and must treat the seller as a customer, unless broker currently has or enters into an agreement of transaction brokerage relationship with the seller, in which case broker must act as transaction broker. So I think I described it wrong. I said the seller's agent already did it, but in this case, it's if I was already representing Brian and Brian wanted to buy a property that my seller already had. Like, so I end up coming in, I have to switch over to that agreement. Okay. Were there any questions, Brian? I saw some stuff moving in there. Oh, you're typing stuff? Your mic's off.
Nope, I got it.
Okay.
I don't know what's wrong with that button on my mic. It's like I press it once, it doesn't work. Every time I press it the second time, it works.
Okay. So from section 4.3.2 of the buyer's age of the exclusive right to buy listing contract, a transaction broker, the one who's playing referee, must perform the duties described in section 5 and facilitate purchase transactions without being an advocate or agent for either party. I cannot negotiate on behalf of either party. I cannot help one party by telling them, this is a strategy, we should do this. That is not allowed. You need to act as an impartial referee and try to get the deal to go through, okay? I prefer personally to work with clients as a buyer's agent so that I can do what's best for you and try to help you with the transaction and negotiate on your behalf. Whether it's a buyer's agent or a transaction broker, the broker must perform the minimum uniform duties. And then buyer's agents have additional duties as well. Okay. Brokerage terms fee. So brokers can be paid, all this is negotiable. Brokers can be paid in a number of different ways, okay? It is not set by law. It is completely negotiable. There are some practical considerations for how this works, but typically this is how it goes down. For a purchase, these are usually the options. And of course, you could do anything you want. I could trade Brian for poker consulting if I wanted to. I could say, listen, I'll help you buy your next house. And Brian, you're going to coach me in poker for the next 16 years. And Brian could say, I agree to that. Let's go ahead and write that up. And I will, what? Is that not right?
That's really cheap.
Right.
I kind of feel like I'm getting hosed on that deal.
Like 32, I should do 32 years? Is that what you mean by really cheap? No?
No.
Okay. So for purchase, it can be paid, and it can be anything you want there. So usually, though, how it's paid, I would say the overwhelming majority of the time is it's as a success fee, and we'll discuss more of that in the next slide, but that's when the purchase actually happens on a property. It could be hourly, though. Brian could say to me, I want to pay you $13 an hour to help me buy a house. And we could agree to that, and I could go and said, okay, I'll go do it. I'm going to log my own hours, and you're just going to pay me $13 an hour as we go. Doesn't matter if you buy the house or not. You're paying me $13 an hour, okay? You could do a retainer. So I've actually done a retainer model before. I used to have clients where they would pay me $2,000 up front. I would bill them, I think it was $60 or $100 an hour, depending on the time period. But it was like I just chunk off the $60 an hour or whatever it was from the $2,000 retainer that they gave me. And then when they ran out of money, they had to put up another $2,000, and I would just keep taking money off. And then when they finally bought a house, I would get paid the commission. I would rebate back to them the money that they had been paying me hourly from the retainer in order to do that work. And that was when I was doing a very niche type of brokerage business for clients that were doing lots of transactions. Or you could do other. So it could be that poker exchange thing if you wanted to do that. Typically, it is not down payment plus success fee. So if Brian's like thinking to himself, okay, I want to go buy a property, I'm a nomad, and I'm light on down payment, I only have $20,000 saved up. How can I afford to pay James a $9,000 success fee and the $20,000 down payment? It's because it doesn't mean both. In most cases, that $9,000 success fee is being paid by the seller's agent, who's actually getting it from the seller's proceeds when the property is sold. So the buyer is not having to come up with the $9,000 success fee and their down payment. They just need to do their down payment. This question comes up quite a bit. It is not both. You only need to have the down payment plus your closing costs, which are the success fee is not. The exception to this is for sale by owner. So if you're buying a property outside the MLS and there's no pre-agreed upon commission coming from the seller's agent, then there may be an additional success fee in addition to your down payment that is due if the real estate broker is helping you buy that property. Okay? There's also a section in the agreement for being paid when negotiating a lease, but I hardly ever use that. Any questions? Okay. I assume no. Success fee. So typically in the agreement, I would normally put in here 3%. If you're buying a really low-cost property, which in northern Colorado, I'd say anything under $100,000 is extremely low cost. It'd be really hard to find a property under $100,000 in northern Colorado that my clients would probably buy. But if it was, then I might say to you, a $3,000 fee is too low for me to assist you with this, so we might set a minimum instead of it being 3%. Because if it's less than $100,000, it might be too low to do that. So in some cases, I'll do that for 3%. Now, This is really, really important. So I want to read this to you because it's interesting when the actual success fee is due, and you could get yourself into a bind where you owe a fee when you don't think you owe a fee. So I want to read this to you. This is from the exclusive right to buy listing contract. 7.1.1.3, when earned, when payable, purchase. The success fee is earned by the brokerage firm upon the purchase of the property and is payable upon closing of the transaction. Nothing surprising there. The success fee is earned when the broker helps you buy a property, and you buy a property at the closing. That's when it's due. Nothing surprising. However, here it goes with some more. If any transaction fails to close as a result of the seller's default, the seller decides, I'm just not going to show up to closing, I changed my mind, I'm not selling the property, with no fault on the part of the buyer didn't do anything wrong, the success fee will be waived. So the seller says, screw this, I'm not selling the property. The agent is out the success fee. They don't care. Okay. However, and this is the part that can get you, if any transaction fails to close as a result of buyer's default, in whole or in part, the success fee will not be waived. Such fee is payable upon buyer's default, but not later than the date that the closing of the transaction was to have occurred. So let me paint you a hypothetical situation. Brian decides he's going to go buy a property. He says, James, your list of lenders that you gave me seem crazy high. I found this lender online who's going to offer me 2% interest rate, and they're going to pay me a $500 credit at closing. It's like a no-lose deal. It's amazing. It's the lowest interest rate and the lowest cost. I'm going to go with them. I'm going to decide to use that lender. And so Brian goes through all the process. Everything looks great. Goes through the inspection. Inspection's fine. Gets the appraisal done. The appraisal is fine. The lender is supposed to show up with money at closing, and the lender just doesn't show up. They just don't send money. They accepted Brian's fees for doing some of the underwriting and processing and stuff like that, but they didn't show up with money. So technically, it's the lender's fault. But who's really at fault if Brian picked a lender that doesn't perform? Brian is at fault. It is Brian's fault for picking that lender. He could choose from any lender, and if the lender doesn't show up, now he may have the ability to go after the lender, after the fact, and sue them. But as far as this contract goes, the lender is not a party to the contract. The lender is not in default because the lender is not a party. Brian, as the buyer, is now in default. So here's the interesting thing. I am a super desperate real estate agent where if I don't get this commission today, my kids are not eating. My dog is not getting dog food. My car is going to be repossessed. I'm counting on this $9,000. I went and I got a payday loan to fund my groceries last week because I knew I was going to get $9,000 today, and I'm really hard up for the money. And Brian just defaulted. So technically, because Brian defaulted, a success fee is due. Brian owes me $9K. So am I going after Brian?
No.
Why not, Brian? I mean, you owe me $9K.
Yeah, you're gonna be homeless and starving by the time you would actually get through the court system to get it, and you're probably not gonna win. So,
fair enough. I have a different approach. The reason why I'm not going to collect from Brian is because I think Brian's going to buy this property for me, and a property 3 years from now for me, and a property 10 years from now for me, and he's going to sell another property. He's going to refer his brother to me, and he's going to buy like 74 properties over the course of the next 74 years. So for me to be short-sighted and try to force blood from a stone from Brian, who really just made a mistake in this case, and even if he did make a mistake, even if it was overt and he's just like, I'm just not buying it, they could sue me. They can keep my earnest money. I'm not showing up. Even in that case. Well, in that case, I may not want to work with Brian anymore. But in theory, I wouldn't go after him for the commission for that, okay? Even though it's due. So be super careful that if you are default, you realize that success fee could be due. So who will pay the brokerage's firm? So who decides, let's see, how do I word this? Who pays the buyer's agent's fee? Here it is, 7.3.1. The listing brokerage firm or the seller may pay, but buyer is obligated to pay. It goes on to say, the broker is authorized and instructed to request payment of the brokerage firm's fee from the listing brokerage firm or seller. The buyer is obligated to pay any portion of the brokerage firm's fee which is not paid by the listing brokerage firm or the seller. So Brian says to me, hey, I want to work with you. I want you to get paid from the seller's agent like we talked about. I say, great. I'm going to go check this box here that says listing brokerage firm or seller may pay. Buyer is obligated to pay. And Brian's like, wait a minute here. I don't understand this. It says that I'm obligated, but you're going to try to get it from the seller. What happens if you can't get it from the seller? And I say, if I can't get it from the seller, then we're going to discuss how I'm going to get paid. But I need to have this box checked if I'm going to try to get the commission from the seller and negotiate on your behalf to get the seller to pay me, because otherwise I am not a party to the contract. I cannot negotiate on my behalf of getting the seller to pay. I need to be negotiating on Brian's behalf in order to negotiate getting him to not have to pay the difference in the commission. Subtle points, but really important, and why I normally check this box. Okay, so this is normally what I would use, and it allows me to negotiate for Brian so that Brian doesn't have to come out of pocket. Without this being selected, I'm not allowed to ask the seller to make up the difference.
Have you ever had this happen? Where the seller's agent refused to pay?
No, it wouldn't be that the seller's agent refused to pay. The case where this could come up is where the seller was offering 2.5% commission, and our agreement was that you agreed to pay me 3%.
Sure.
And so that's where it would normally come up. But no, it's not normally that they have ever shorted me. I've never had that happen. But
that seems to be my, like, when I read this is always my bigger concern. Like, well, if for some reason the like seller's brokerage is like, yeah, we just finished that transaction, now we're going out of business, so we're just not paying James because who cares?
Oh, no, that never happens, because the title company who's closing the transaction, they're actually going to divide up the money proceeds and make sure everyone gets paid.
Right.
Yeah.
I mean, that I would assume that's their job, but I'm also like,
No.
What if the seller's agent says, no, don't pay you?
I don't think they have the ability to do that.
I would assume not, but
yeah,
title companies also aren't going to settle a legal dispute.
Yeah, I've never had that happen.
Yeah, I didn't think so, but
no. There is another situation, which I think is coming up here in a second, where you and I actually had a phone call about this. I remember this conversation we had, and I'm trying to remember the details of it, but I'll try to. I'll read it and hopefully I'll remember. So these are the other, there's 3 options. That was the option I normally do. These are the other 2 options you could have in your agreement. 7.3.2, buyer will pay. Buyer is obligated to pay brokerage's firm's fee. There's no other, like, I'm going to try to get it from the seller. I'm not going to try to negotiate with the seller's agent. There's nothing like that in there. It's just saying, hey, the buyer's paying it. And if I remember correctly, this came up with you and me on a deal off the MLS where I marked this field. I didn't discuss it with you ahead of time. I just sent this over to you with this checked. And I believe you called me and you questioned me on it. You're like, wait a minute, I am obligated to pay. And I explained to you that there's no like seller's agent to go after. It was just like, we're agreeing that, in order for me to help you buy this property off market, I think it was I sent out direct mail and I helped you buy a property off MLS. And I think that this was the checkbox. And I think there was a discussion about this. Do you remember this transaction? Something like this?
I'm assuming, was it our flip or was it the other one?
I think it was the other one. Or I think it was one that didn't actually close. I sent this over and we ended up not getting the deal.
Oh, where we walked in with the contract and didn't get it signed?
And the person walked out of the room and never even acknowledged us and let us out.
Yeah.
That one, right? I think that's.
I don't remember having this discussion because there were so many other things that outweighed any of this.
Yeah. I think that's where this one went down.
Huh.
So if you're like, if I'm helping a real estate investor buy a property from for sale by owner, this is typically what I would try to put in there if I knew that my client was planning on paying me outside the transaction or paying me like a fee and that we were going to negotiate the best deal we can get from the for sale by owner, but the buyer was responsible for paying me whatever the fee was. It would be this box, okay? Or, this is another one, 7.3.3, the listing broker firm or seller may pay. Buyer is not obligated to pay. So this is the case like Brian says to me, James, whatever you can get from the seller or the seller's agent, that's all on you, buddy. You can get them to pay you 15%. You got it. That's all up to you. But I'm not paying you anything more. And even if it's only $500 that they're paying you, I'm not making up the difference. And so that is an option that sometimes comes up as well. And if no box is checked, if for whatever reason the agent fill in this format just doesn't check a box, 7.3.3 is the default. So it sort of defaults to the buyer not having any obligation to pay except what is already being offered by the seller's agent as a cooperative commission. Okay. I love this slide. What if this beautiful car on the left, this sports car with amazing, whatever those types of doors are, the doors that fly up like, I don't know, like little tiny karate chop doors. Karate chop doors, that's what they're called, I think, right? The karate chop door sports car that's all glistening and black and amazing. What if that cost the exact same as this piece of crap junker that's trashed and wrecked and barely is on 3 tires?
That was your car that you took me to in the first showing in.
No, my car actually looked okay. It just the AC didn't work. Actually, no, the AC worked. It was the heat that didn't work sometimes.
Yep.
Oh, man, that's pretty funny. Suicide doors, scissor doors. People are guessing all this stuff. So anyway, like you're looking at these two different things. What if these cost exactly the same amount of money? I mean, that'd be crazy, right? What's weird about this is exactly what happens in the real estate world with buyer's agents. The brand new, never did a transaction before guy just out of real estate school who doesn't know the difference, doesn't know that he needs to stop letters, doesn't have any processes, doesn't have any checklists, doesn't have the ability to run rent comps or have any experience with anything going awry in a transaction, or like doesn't really know what he's or she is supposed to be doing, costs exactly the same as that grizzled veteran who is at the top of their game. They've got 36 pages of checklists. They've got this like amazing process and system. They know everything that has to happen. They've kind of dealt with every kind of weird thing that's ever gone sideways before. They cost the same. And that's what's really weird about this business, is that you could go hire your sister-in-law who is brand new out of real estate school, and she's going to get paid the same in almost all cases as the veteran who knows like everything.
Yeah. To put this into perspective, because I think some people might be like, well, it's buying a house. You're going to sign a contract, and most of the time we're going to go to closing and everything's going to work out, and that's going to be great. And maybe there's a couple little things that, you know, my sister-in-law who got her license recently doesn't do as well as you, but who, like, it's not really going to make a big difference. And I think the kind of equivalent to this is if you were in a car accident and the person that you hit or that hit you suddenly sued you for $2 million and you had the ability to go hire any attorney you wanted, would you pick the one right out of law school, or would you pick the one with 20 years of experience who's been trying cases literally for 20 years and has a great record? Because if you pick the one right out of law school, if they were the same cost, like, you're probably not picking that one. And so while you may not think it's this way, I can tell you from personal experience is definitely this way. Having someone who has been through a lot of different scenarios in a lot of different properties with a lot of different people and a lot of different other agents matters. Having process matters. All of those things matter way more than you will most normally ever find out, because most of the transactions will run really smoothly. And if you use James, most of your transactions will run really smoothly, but it's because of all of the background and all of the experience and all of the process. So part of the problem is when you use the experienced person, things go really smoothly because they should. When you use the brand new person, a lot of times things go really smoothly too, because
it's accident.
It's accident, right? And, you know, you're buying a single family home and, you know, we bought it, we did the inspection, we negotiated a little, but you just don't know until something bad actually happens.
Ignorance is bliss.
Yeah.
You think everything's like fine and that the agent knows what they're doing and that everything's going to happen until you realize, 3 years later, you didn't get an important document you needed at closing done and signed. And you're like, holy crap, should I have that? Yes, you should have that.
Yeah. I mean, it's as simple as like, I don't know what the rule is on this now because I think it changed again, but like having the lead paint disclosure document signed prior to the contract being signed.
Yeah.
Like if you didn't have that, your contract's not valid. If your sister-in-law doesn't know that and they get an offer for $50,000 more for the same house and they figure that out, guess what happens? You don't get the house.
Yeah.
So all those little details and nuances, they matter when push comes to shove.
Yeah. And there's no reason for you to not get someone experienced if you're the buyer.
If
you're the real estate investor buyer, they cost the same. If you're like, but I need to take care of my sister, get her a really nice Christmas gift.
No.
But go ahead and use an actual agent that is going to do that. I mean, that's what I would recommend you do. Or if you really want to get crazy with it, ask your sister to refer you to the best agent she knows. Have her get a piece of the commission. It's the same cost to you. It doesn't cost you anything. And then you work with somebody who's amazing.
And she doesn't have to do any work.
Exactly.
So it's a win for her. Hey, you're going to get some of the money and you don't have to do anything, but I get the best service.
Yeah. And the other weird thing is sometimes there are people that they're like amazingly nice. They're like the nicest people and you want to hang out with them and stuff like that, but they're not competent and they don't really, they're like, their only skill is congeniality. It is like, that's their actual skill set. It's not like brokerage skill set.
We know you're not talking about me, so there's that.
Oh, we know we're not talking about me too, because I am definitely not Mr. Congeniality. So, yeah. Anyway, that's what we're talking about. All right, so continuing on. So holdover period. So holdover period deals with this situation. Brian says, I really don't like working with this clown, James. I looked at a property. He showed it to me. And I stayed after, and I was out in the lawn. I was talking to, a friend of mine, and the seller came home after the listing. And I happened to strike up a conversation with the seller. And the seller says, hey, if it doesn't go under contract next week, I'm actually going to pull it off the market, and I'm just going to do for sale by owner. No more messing around with this, and I'm probably going to drop the price a little bit. And so Brian's like, okay, well, if you do that, let me know, because I'll go ahead and cancel my agreement with James so that James doesn't get paid and we don't have to worry about paying him a commission, and I'll just buy it straight from you and I'll get a discount. The holdover period basically deals with what happens in that situation. And typically how it's worded, it defaults in favor of the agent in most cases, but typically a commission is owed if they negotiated or sent you the property and you end up buying it within, and there's usually a blank, it's usually 90 days. Okay. The checkbox determines whether a commission would be due in this other unusual situation where we saw the property. Brian and I were working together. We saw the property. And then shortly thereafter, Brian decides, James didn't get my kid a nice enough Christmas gift. Screw him. I'm going to go work with this other agent. And that other agent ends up writing the contract with Brian on the same property that James showed him. And now the other agent thinks a commission is due, but James also thinks a commission is due as well, because James is the one that showed him the property originally. In that case, there's a checkbox as to whether or not a commission is due to James, or if James is not owed a commission in that situation. Okay? So that's the situation. I think I see a question on here from Abner about spreadsheet. I don't know if you want to troubleshoot that, but it should be up there and working. I had 13 people download it today, I know. Exclusive right to buy listing contract. So limitation on third-party compensation. Brian, do you think I'm able to get a fee for recommending an inspector to you, or recommending an insurance agent to you, or recommending a certain lender to you? Can I get a kickback? Can I say, hey, Brian, you should go use ABC Insurance Company because they're going to pay me the most money? Am I allowed to do that?
No.
I can't do it unless you give me written consent. And if for some reason I am in any way getting any type of kickback or incentive for recommending you to a certain third-party vendor for anything, I must give you an affiliated business relationship, which basically says I have an affiliated business relationship with this other business. And if you decide to use ABC Insurance or this particular lender or this particular title company or whatever, then I am going to get a small kickback, or maybe I have an ownership interest and I get some of the profits. I am required to disclose that to you. So I cannot get any type of compensation or kickback or anything else unless you know about it. So if you're wondering to yourself, why is James pushing me so hard to go with any of these three lenders? I mean, I like this online lender that's got this amazingly good deal and really low fees. Why is he pushing so hard on his lenders? I don't know. It's not because I'm getting money. Buyer's obligation to broker. So this is what the agreement basically says you need to do as the buyer. You need to conduct all negotiations through the broker. You need to refer all communications received from brokers, prospective sellers, or any other source to the broker. So you can't be side negotiating deals or talking to the seller or talking to the other broker and trying to negotiate things. That's not supposed to be how it works. And then if you are working with any other broker, you need to disclose that because the other broker needs to know who else you're working with. Okay? All right, so here's the right to cancel and why that kind of provision I told you about earlier is so important. I'm going to read it to you so that you can understand how it's very pro-broker, in my opinion, and not very pro-buyer. Okay, so this is the section on your ability to cancel this agreement. 10.1, right of buyer to cancel. In the event broker defaults, if the broker defaults under this buyer listing contract, the buyer has the right to cancel this buyer listing contract, including all rights of brokerage firm to any compensation if the buyer agency box at the top of page 1 is checked. So it includes compensation. Examples of a broker default, and this is the list. If it's not on here, it's going to be hard for you to say that the broker can cancel. The broker defaulted. Examples of broker default include, but are not limited to, 1, abandonment of buyer. If I stop returning your phone calls, I stop returning emails, I stop scheduling showings for you, I stop dealing with title work or appraisers or anything like that, that's abandonment. Me not returning one phone call probably isn't abandonment. Probably need to try twice just in case I didn't get it. 2, failure to fulfill all material obligations of broker, which are outlined in the agreement. And 3, failure to fulfill all material uniform duties, which is also in the agreement, section 5. Or if the buyer agency box at the top of page 1 is checked, the failure to fulfill all material additional duties of buyer's agency, section 6. So if I fail to do those, then I have defaulted and you can terminate the agreement. If that's not the case, it's really hard for you to terminate this agreement unless I put in that additional provision there, which says you can cancel at any time just by sending an email. That makes it super wide open. Okay? So any rights of buyer that accrued prior to cancellation will survive such cancellation. So I can't talk about your secrets. I can't talk about things I learned while we were working together, even if this has been terminated. And then here's the other section for right to cancel, the right of the broker to cancel. So I don't like working with Brian anymore. This is what I'm held to. The brokerage firm may cancel this buyer listing contract upon written notice to buyer if buyer fails to reasonably cooperate with broker or buyer defaults under this buyer listing contract. So if I'm saying to you, hey, I really need you to provide me a lender letter, and you continue to not give me your lender letter in order for us to do this, or you don't send me back the COVID form signed, or you don't sign the buyer agency, well, I guess you already have this signed. If you don't sign, paperwork that I send over to you that needs to be signed, or do things like deliver earnest money, that is reasonably cooperating, and I can terminate the agreement if you're not doing that. Okay. Continue on reading. Any rights of the brokerage firm that accrued prior to cancellation will survive such cancellation. So if I earned the success fee up to this point, then that's still in place. Okay. Now with my new agreement, either party can cancel with an email. So Brian doesn't like me, sends an email. I don't like Brian, I can send an email. There's no explaining. There's no reasonably cooperating. There's no defaulting. It's just, we're done. Okay. Cost of third-party services. So if you go hire a inspector to inspect your property, or an industrial hygienist, or an appraiser, or you have a lender do something, or you order title work, and there's an O&E report or whatever it is that you need to do there, all the costs or services of products obtained from outside sources will be the responsibility of the buyer in this case. I'm not paying for those as the broker. They're all your stuff as the buyer. Okay. Showing properties, buyer acknowledges that broker has explained the possible methods used in listing brokers and sellers to show properties. So for example, if I am limited in the properties I can show, you have a right to know that. You have a right to know that I can't show you properties by this company or that are on this system, or I don't have the ability to access properties with this special type of locking system. You have a right to know that I'm limiting what you can buy, and that has to be disclosed to you here. Can I disclose your identity? So if Brian were secretly the owner of Walmart and he wanted to go buy some land to go build a Walmart, he could say, hey, listen, you need to keep my identity secret. I can't tell people that you're Walmart buying this stuff, and we'd have to check off this special box. For all other cases, unless it's like, you're a public figure or there's something really secretive going on, then not disclosing your identity is going to cause you more problems than it's worth. So in almost all cases, Brian, do you ever want me to not reveal your identity when we're buying properties?
Not to a seller, to other buyers, yes.
Good point. Yeah, so I just naturally don't reveal your identity to other buyers that you're doing stuff. But yeah, in this case, it's talking about being able to reveal it in the course of buying the property. Disclosure of settlement service costs. Buyer acknowledges that the costs, the quality, and the extent of service vary between different settlement service providers. For example, attorneys, lenders, inspectors, and title companies. Hey guys, there are good inspectors out there. There are really sucky inspectors. There are really good attorneys out there. There are really sucky attorneys. There are really good agents out there. There are really sucky agents. There are really good inspectors and title companies, and there are sucky ones of those as well. So you guys need to realize that the costs for these things vary widely. I just had an electrician come out and give us bids on putting the electrical system in for the hot tub. There's a bid that's 3 times the lowest bid. 3 times. So just normal range, same service, same literally putting an electric wire in through my basement to the outside of my house, the back of my house, 3 times as much. Yeah, I'm not even gonna go there. Okay, non-discrimination. So I agree not to discriminate unlawfully as a prospective seller because of race, creed, color, sex, sexual orientation, marital status, familial status, physical or mental disability, handicap, religion, national origin, or ancestry of such person. I recommend you get legal and tax advice. It says so right in the agreement. Everyone should. You're agreeing to mediation. So if we don't agree on something and you don't like how it's going, we're agreeing in advance to be mediated. And if we decide we're going to go and sue each other in court over this agreement, the winning party gets their attorney's fees paid for by the losing party. So unless you really feel like you 100% know you're going to win, I'm probably hiring a really expensive attorney. And unless you win, you're paying for it. So just realize that. Exclusive right to buy, listing contract, additional provisions. So we talked about these. These are the 2 things that I allow you to terminate the agreement, or I allow the broker to terminate. Those are the examples we've talked about already. All right. So we hinted at this earlier. And by the way, the second half of the presentation goes a lot faster than the first. So working with one agent versus working with multiple agents. So what are some benefits of working with one agent? Well, if you work as a buyer's agent, where the agent has a fiduciary obligation to represent your best interests, and this is a quote, promoting the interests of buyer with the utmost good faith, loyalty, and fidelity. And I have a secret listing that comes across my desk, an amazing deal. Can I call just my best clients and tell them about that amazing deal? And the answer is no, I cannot. I am obligated, if you have an exclusive right to buy with me and that property is covered under the description and the geographic area, the type of property that it is, I am required to disclose that to you. Okay, I can't keep it secret and just call Brian, right? I have to tell everybody. So that's one of the reasons why you may want to work exclusively with one agent. As you do multiple transactions, I can sometimes do pretty amazing things for clients, like write strong letters and make your case for the seller accepting the deal. Brian, you have seen this in action. Does this work?
Yep, for sure. Knowing that having a seller's agent, even though the seller doesn't necessarily know the buyer that you're representing, having a seller's agent know and be like, they did a transaction with me before. It went really smoothly. It was very easy to work with them. They're very reasonable. They get stuff done. Like, you should choose this one, even though it's slightly a lower offer. Yeah.
So if I have a client that I've done a number of transactions with, and I can say that to an agent and say, listen, I've worked with, I do 40 transactions a year. I have for many, many years. This is the strongest buyer I've ever worked with. If they tell you they're going to close, they're going to close. saying that to an agent because I have experience with you is very different than you do one transaction with one agent, one transaction with another agent, and they really can't say that you are performance-based, that you actually will honor your word and get things done and do what you say you're going to do. So having that ability, I think, goes a long way. I know for a fact, people have told me, agents have told me after the fact, you were not the high bid, but I know your reputation, and I know you work with really good clients, and your letter about this particular client was what actually made the seller pick you guys, even though it was lower. So I know that for a fact it has gotten deals accepted. Now, what's the downside of deciding Brian's going to say, hey, I'm only going to work with James? Well, each agent has a very limited view of the world. If Brian really wanted to buy something in like Old Town, Fort Collins, I probably am not an expert or specialist at Old Town, Fort Collins. You know, it probably even some of the stuff in like parts of Greeley or, you know, other things like that is not really my area of expertise. But there are other strong things I have, like my knowledge of some of the paperwork and our processes are like really, really good. So Brian may say, yeah, he's limited in these areas, but I'd still rather have him for these other strengths that he has. And I think that's true of all agents. All agents will have their own strengths and weaknesses. And so realize they have limited views of the world and limited strengths and weaknesses. And so that's the kind of two downsides of picking one agent, is you get stuck with whatever my weaknesses are or whatever the other agent you decide has weaknesses, and that's true. And Brian knows I have weaknesses. I mean, it's almost like a joke. We go around and talk about all the different weaknesses I have because I think there are quite a few of them. But at least I'm aware of my weaknesses. Is that true, Brian?
I don't know that we talk about them a lot, but
we don't bring up my weaknesses all the time.
Well, I mean, you know, you think you're an introvert, but you act like an extrovert, like those kind of things. Yeah.
Fair enough.
But other than that, I mean, and wearing Crocs with socks in the snow,
if you want an agent to dress up for you and show up at a closing of a $3 million ish transaction, and everyone else around the table is wearing a suit, and I show up in a pair of cargo shorts and a t-shirt with Crocs on, that's probably a downside a little bit.
Yeah. I mean, really the biggest joke I think that we've ever had was like, hey, when you ask James how much rent is, he'll say $12.95 and it'll be $15.95.
That's also true.
Right. Yeah.
In which we've solved some of that.
Yeah.
Okay. So here's some of the advantages and disadvantages of working with multiple agents, because I think there's a lot of real estate investors out there that are like, I'd like to actually have 34 different agents out there looking for the best deals for me. I think that's a better strategy. Okay, let's talk about it. Number one is you might get more exposure to inside deals. You have 34 different agents out there working for you. You probably get exposed to more inside deals. But let me tell you how these inside deals typically work and how they're supposed to work by agreement. So if I get an inside deal, I have a fiduciary obligation to send it out to all of the buyers I already have agreements with. So all of my buyers need to see it first. If all of them pass, then you, who don't have an exclusive buyer agency with me, get the deal. That is by definition when you have a fiduciary obligation to treat them with the utmost respect. What's this? Buyer with the utmost good faith, loyalty, and fidelity. If I don't send it to my guys that are under buyer agency agreements first, then I am actually not serving them, and I could be held in violation for my agreements with them. So realize you're getting, like sloppy seconds, right? That's what it is. So, and if any inside deal, like if I'm representing the seller and I'm sort of like not giving maximum exposure of this deal to all the different buyers by putting in the MLS and trying to get them the best price and terms, am I doing the best job as a fiduciary representing the seller to the seller? No. And so I may be in violation of representing the seller if I send you an inside deal and don't give it maximum exposure and try to get the best price and terms for my seller. And people believe that they may see more deals. I have not found that to be true. What I have found to be true, having seen this play out over and over and over again, is an agent will initiate a conversation with you as a real estate investor. They'll talk to you about what you're looking for. And then as soon as they get a sense that you're working with multiple agents, they realize that you're a long shot and they'd rather work with higher probability type clients where the effort they put in is likely. They'll keep you on a list as like a secondary source, but they're not typically focused on serving you. That's been my experience. I don't know if Brian wants to make any comments about that.
Yeah, I mean, I think there was a time really early on where I was like, well, somebody else might bring me a deal, but then you very quickly realize, like, why would they bring me a deal if I'm not willing to be their exclusive client? It gives them no benefit. They would rather the person that's been buying stuff from them for the last 5 years or 10 years or whatever. Those are the people that deserve the deals from that agent.
Yeah,
And they're probably going to get them.
I agree with you. So here's some downsides of working with multiple agents. Because you have loose relationships with multiple agents, they tend to serve you as a last resort to their clients that are exclusively working with them. We talked about that. In fact, they probably are obligated to serve the exclusive relationships first. We talked about that. They may be bringing you deals where they represent the seller, not you. So they're trying to negotiate the best deal for their seller, not you in this case. And depending on your agreement, you could owe multiple brokerage fees if you sign multiple agreements with multiple agents and these overlap. So that's also a possible downside. The first section is done. We only have 7 more to go. All right, we're gonna play a little game. Brian loves this game. Ready, Brian? So,
Ready.
Who does what in the transaction? And what is your agent responsible for? And what are you responsible for? This is what we're going to play it. So, professional services provided. These are all the things that might come up during a real estate transaction, and we're trying to figure out who does them, who is responsible for it. So, appraisal of the property, Brian. Who does the appraisal?
An appraiser.
Yes, licensed appraiser. What about the assistance with showings? Like, who actually tries to get you on properties and looking at that?
Your realtor.
Your realtor. Awesome. Who is responsible for determining the condition of the property?
You are. Not
you and your the buyer and the inspector, not the realtor.
Yes.
So I can't tell you, hey, the property is this. I really am not qualified to do that for you. Who decides whether a contract is acceptable?
Whether it's acceptable?
Yep. Whether you're okay with the terms.
Well, the buyer and the seller.
Buyer and the seller determines the terms of the contract. What about contract drafting? And this is not just filling in the blanks. This is like writing sections of the contract or creating new legalese type stuff. Who's responsible for contract drafting?
That would be an attorney.
An attorney. Is your agent allowed to go in there and write new sections? Say, hey, listen,
If
I
they're
don't like
attorney.
Yeah, and they usually are not. So if you don't like the section on seller concessions, can I rewrite that for you?
No.
No, absolutely not.
I mean, you can, but you should not.
I would not do that, even
Right.
for you.
Yes, I know. I would just write it for myself.
Right, and I think you can do that. You're allowed to rewrite stuff, although
Right.
it's hard to get it accepted.
Agreed.
Contract preparation, filling in the blanks. Who does
That's
that?
the agent.
The agent. What about home warranties?
It depends. I mean, it's the buyer or the seller, or sometimes the agent will pay for a home warranty. So it really depends.
Who are they paying, though?
They're paying the home warranty company.
So the home warranty company is the person or the company responsible for home warranties.
Yeah, so your agent may pay for it, the seller may pay for it, you may pay for it, but the warranty company is actually responsible.
Correct. What about an improvement location certificate? This is the really light version of a survey that shows you where stuff is on your property, like the shed and the property and the driveway. Who does those?
Not you.
Yeah, not you. Not the agent. It's the surveyor.
These
Surveyor
are
does
hard
this.
to get people to do quickly, too.
Yeah, they are. They totally are. What about inspections? And we
The
recommend you get inspections on every property.
Inspector.
The inspector does. Yep. What about who selects the inspector?
The buyer.
The buyer does. Can the agent give you a list?
Sure.
Yeah. Now, can you use someone off the list?
Yes.
Who pays for it?
The buyer.
Buyer. Great. Yep. Legal advice. Who gives you legal advice? Who interprets the contract paragraphs and explains them to you and says, legally, this is what this means?
Well, explaining the contract and giving legal advice are two very different things. So your agent is probably capable in many cases of telling you what that section is for, but your attorney is telling you what the legal advice actually would be. Right?
Yeah, if you're interpreting stuff and getting legal advice about how this really plays out and how that's usually not your agent.
Agreed.
Despite what happened tonight. Lender selection.
James has just been giving legal advice all night long.
I've been interpreting legal contracts all night. Lender selection. Who gets to select the lender?
Yeah, so before we get there, I think what really tends to happen is, your agent, if they're well-versed in the contract, they will say, this is probably what happens, but you really need to go check with your attorney to actually know. I'm not an attorney, you need to go find out.
Yeah.
So lender selection, that's the buyer. Yes, your agent can give you a list, but it's the buyer selection.
Okay, good. And we talked about list of home inspectors. Typically, your agent's going to give you a list of home inspectors, and the list of lenders. Typically, your agent will give you a list of possible lenders that you should consider. You're welcome to go off list for both of those. You can choose whoever you want. If you choose a bad one, you are responsible, and your agent is typically giving you ones that, at least in the past, have done a decent job. Okay.
So if I choose one off your list and they suck, whose fault is it, James?
Yeah, unfortunately, it's your fault because you should have interviewed all three.
Yeah.
But I mean, I'm not intentionally trying to give you a list of 3 that suck. I'm not trying to give you any that suck. I'm trying to give you the best ones I have and that would do a good job. But I have a belief that everyone goes lame at some point.
Yep.
It's unfortunate, but I think that's true. What about the loan rate or the loan term decision? Who decides which rate you select and which term of loan you select?
The lender provides the list, but the buyer selects.
Buyer selects, right. What about market evaluation? Like how many houses are selling, property values going up, property values
Hopefully
going
your
down.
agent can give you that information.
Yep, your agent should.
If
what about
you should probably find a new agent.
I agree with that too. Megan's Law, basically that we have a right to know about sex offenders on properties around us. Who is responsible for that? How does that work?
Well, the police are responsible for putting it in the system, as long with whatever other government agencies are responsible for that. I'm not 100% which agency it is, but you're responsible for going and looking it up.
So is it your realtor's obligation to say, hey, 2 houses down is a registered sex offender? You need to know that.
I don't know.
That they do not need to do that.
Okay.
There's a section of the contract to buy and sell real estate, that basically says if you have concerns about sex offenders in your neighborhood, you should contact local law enforcement and do research, look up the sex offender map and registration, and figure out if there's anyone around you if you have concerns about that.
Yeah.
So
for clarity, for those of you that are new, I'm not an agent, so it's not my responsibility to know that.
That's true. No, this is totally true. I mean, yeah, I'm sort of asking you as the buyer, right?
Right.
So what about methamphetamine?
I don't know anything about meth, so.
So is the agent responsible for telling you if there was meth cooked in the house, or if there's meth in the house, or it sort of smells like meth in here, or this looks like a meth house? Are they supposed to be able to tell you that?
No, they're not qualified to do that. However, if you have knowledge of any kind, you must disclose it.
That is true, except this is a really interesting case. Okay, so with meth, if a seller has remediated the property,
right,
so that it has actually passed whatever the safety standards are,
sure,
the seller and the seller's agent are not required to disclose that the property previously tested high for meth, which blows my mind. Now, and this is an example of why you want to actually have your own agent, right? Because if the other agent happens to know that it was, or happens to have information, the buyer's agent, if they're representing you, they should disclose to you that they have this knowledge. But the seller's agent, representing the seller, does not and should not disclose that they knew that the property had meth. And if it passed that test and was remediated to whatever the standards were, then they do not have to disclose.
Right.
Okay. Now, if you're concerned about that, if you go in and you're like, they have all these cameras on the outside, there's cars driving up, slowing down, looking out there, they're missing all their teeth, they've got $5 hanging out the window, and they're driving really slow, and you see like 13 of them pass by while you're out there. Is that sort of maybe a clue that it might be a meth house?
It's
Maybe.
Probably more a clue that it's a drug house of some form.
Well, sometimes, yeah. I was just kind of painting an example.
Yes.
And if you really want to know about that, who do you call?
The police.
An industrial hygienist is the correct answer.
I call the police and look for police reports first, and then I will spend money on an industrial hygienist.
You could do that too. Industrial hygienists are not cheap.
Right.
Mold inspection
first.
Yeah, mold inspection.
Not your home inspector in most cases. You actually need a qualified mold person.
Yeah, but your inspector may say to you, hey, this may be mold. You probably should have it tested by someone else.
In fact, I have had a home inspector who I trust and value, who's unfortunately retired from home inspecting, tell me that he came down from the attic and was like, I think you have like 1,000 square feet of mold in your attic. So I called a mold guy, came and did tests, sent him off to the lab, no mold. So people make mistakes, right? He's just advising me, hey, you should get this tested.
It looks weird. I don't know what it is.
Right. And I'm not going to go scrape around in it. So
yeah.
Yeah.
So that's mold. You basically have a mold inspector or environmental professional do that. What about negotiations? Who's negotiating the terms of the agreement for you?
Who's negotiating it with the seller?
Yes,
My
seller's
agent.
agent. Correct. Neighborhood crime. And by the way, all areas have some crime. There's no
Jaywalking.
crime-free.
Yep.
No crime-free areas. Who's responsible for crime stuff? Where do you get that information? Who's
The police?
police? Yep. New loan. Who do you talk to about getting a new
Lender.
loan on the property? Yeah, your bank or your mortgage company. Structural. Is your agent supposed to go downstairs and say, hey, look, there's a big crack in this thing. Structurally, it looks fine now. Are they supposed to do that?
Your agent should say, hey, there's a big crack. I don't know if you noticed this. You might want to get this checked out. But no, you need a structural engineer.
Yeah, structural engineer. Yep, absolutely. Survey, not an improvement location certificate. So if you need to know exact property lines and where things are and things of that nature, who do you hire for that?
A survey company.
Survey company, surveyor. Yep. Taxes. If you have any questions about how this applies to your specific tax situation, does your agent say to you, oh yeah, 1031, this is how that works. Oh, it's super easy. Just do this in your tax form. Mark this box, you're fine.
Only if they're a CPA.
Yeah, CPA or accountant. Termites.
Pest inspector.
Yep. What about title work? Like when the title work comes back when you're buying a property, should your agent sit down with you and go over line by line what each title thing is and say, oh, that doesn't make sense to me. We should change this, or we should have this removed, or we should negotiate this. Is that who does that?
Well, there's two things here, right? One is that your agent should probably be going through and looking to see if all the numbers are correct based on what it's done. Like, are the taxes prorated correctly and things like that? Line by line that way, sure. But otherwise, you need an attorney.
So like all the title work about like easements and
attorney.
This used to be old railroad and, this is like no mineral rights.
Yes, attorney.
Yeah. Okay, yeah. So an attorney does that or like a title professional, not your real estate agent. That is not something a real estate agent does. And so if you want to, here are the correct answers. If you want to quiz yourself to see who does what, but realize your real estate agent is only doing a small part of this transaction. We are not trained on appraisals or inspections or title work or how to draft legal documents or anything like that. The training we have is very specific and very confined to a very small area. And here is who does all the other parts of the transaction so that you know. All right, your real estate goals. We talked about this. I usually discuss like what you're trying to do. If you're trying to buy an owner-occupant property, you're trying to nomad, trying to do buy and hold, lease options, fix and flip, you're trying to do creative transactions off the MLS. If you need us to model, do a nomad or real estate financial planner type stuff, that tends to be those types of discussions. And usually clients that are, continuing to be clients and they're buying stuff with me actively, they can sit down with me before COVID. Now they can probably schedule a call or a webinar or whatever it is and discuss their situation and what's going on. And that's how we typically work at that. Next thing is about financing. Good news. I don't have to teach you financing tonight because we already have a number of classes on financing, like 6+ hours worth of the best stuff we have available on financing, where we dive really deep into all the different loan programs, pros and cons, how they work, all the different terms and structure in these things and lenders and what you should, have for your lender and prepare for and applying for loans and all those stuff. So there's like hours and hours and hours. It's at realestatefinancialplanner.com/financing-classes. You should go and study that for financing rather than me just kind of half-ass it right now and spend 30 seconds. I'm just going to tell you, get the best stuff we have by going and listen to the full 2, 3, 4, 6 hours of classes. But I will, like when Brian and I are out and we're talking about structured deals and financing and how to do stuff, we definitely discuss financing as we're looking at stuff. It is not like watch the class and that's the end of it. It's, hey, I'm thinking about buying this property this way. What do you think? Hey, that's 25% down. It's not 20% down. Or, yeah, if you're going to bring in a partner, this is how that's going to work, or whatever it is. And so those are ongoing discussions as we shop for properties, doing that. And you should bring your lender into those discussions as well. Receiving property lists. So we have entire classes, again, on finding properties, which it covers both inside the MLS and outside the MLS. Go to realestatefinancialplanner.com/finding-properties-classes. And it has all the classes on finding properties, getting the property list, what we ask for, how we ask for it, how we structure those, like what you want on there. And then Brian did in the class where we talked about receiving the property list through analyzing the deal. So Brian walked you through his flow of what happens when Tammy sends me an email with a deal to deciding whether or not I'm buying the property. And that was like real-time deal analysis with Brian Williams.
There's several of them. I mean, but that's one of them. Yes.
Yeah. So it's stuff like that. So there's a whole bunch of stuff. This is why the second half goes so much quicker. Analyzing deals. Guess what? I'm not teaching you deal analysis in 13 minutes, in 17 minutes. We have, I don't know, dozens of classes on deal analysis. And coming up in like 2 weeks, we have basically what's going to make all of our old deal analysis classes obsolete, because we're going to show you why everything you learned about deal analysis is wrong. And so that class is coming up on October 7th, which will basically take all the stuff. And as Brian said, it's not that all the stuff is wrong. It's just that they're all wrong. Like the numbers are wrong. But everything you learned about how to do stuff, all that stuff still applies. It's just there's new stuff that makes it all not correct, is the best way I can describe it without giving away too much. So what I said is I usually talk a little bit about initial meeting, but really there's like dozens of classes on deal analysis that Brian has up there on the website. You can go to realestatefinancialplanner.com/analyzing-deals-classes, and it's got a whole bunch right there. And then Brian's spreadsheet is on there. And then if you want to do modeling, the best way I could describe Real Estate Financial Planner for someone who's never kind of heard of the idea before is the spreadsheet is what you use to analyze a deal. Buying a single family home, buying a duplex, triplex, fourplex, buying a commercial building, buying an apartment building, doing a lease option, putting together a partnership where you're buying a property. That's the spreadsheet. If you want to know how buying one house a year works, or buying one house every time you save up a down payment, or I own 13 properties, should I pay them off? Should I cash out refinance and buy more? Should I do lease option exits? Should I invest in stocks and real estate, and what combination of each should I do? That's all the Real Estate Financial Planner stuff. So it's not just one deal. It's one deal as part of an entire plan and strategy. And so that's what the planner software does compared to a spreadsheet. Any comments about that, Brian?
Nope.
Okay.
Sounds about right.
And then finally, if you need rent comps, at least for me, as if you're a client of mine, then we provide you, we subscribe to a service now where we can look up rent comps and provide you stuff like that. And so usually I'll tell clients when we start talking about analyzing deals that is a service we have. But if you're using a property manager, you should use your property manager to give you an idea of what they think you can rent for as well. And then finally, writing offers. So we usually talk very briefly about this during the first meeting. We talk about DocuSign, signing documents electronically, but we cover this in like excruciating detail, just like we do with all the deep dive classes, in making strong offers that get accepted. And those are all under the realestatefinancialplanner.com/real estate investor classes by year. And that lists 300 classes or something ridiculous at this point. So they're all like in there mixed in. All right. So that was the first meeting of the entire buying process. That was box one. But the good news is a lot of these are basically the same thing where we have entire classes. So pre-showings, usually we qualify you with a lender. Before you do that, we want to make sure that you have your lender letter before we go out and look at houses. We don't want to take you out, especially with COVID. We don't want to take you out looking at properties unless you're qualified with a lender to be able to buy the property. So we discuss this in the financing classes, Real Estate Financial Planner /financing classes. Call one or more lenders, get pre-qualified. The ultimate goal is to get a pre-approval letter, to get a letter from the lender saying you're good to go. You can buy a house. You'll want to make a formal application. You'll want to understand what they're going to need and provide it to them as soon as possible. So if they tell you they're going to need W-2s or bank statements, you're going to want to know if you can get that to them, because in some cases, it may be hard for you to provide that, and you don't want to find this out after you find the property that you love and you've started negotiations that you can't get your loan. That'd be bad, okay? You want to get rates so that you'll know what to use when you do your deal analysis and what your monthly payment will be if you're doing buying as an owner-occupant. And then know what your comfortable number is, and then what your max you qualify for is, because a lot of times when you originally go out, your comfortable number may be unrealistic for you to find what you want in, and so you want to know where you have to stop. I've done this so many times now that a lot of times someone says, I really like to stay below $800 a month my payment. And then they end up being at $1,600 in order to just make it work, okay? So you need a pre-approval letter. You have to have this before you look at properties. And we discuss this in the financing classes. Get it from your lender. Send me a copy because we're going to need it when we do your offers. And then when we make your offer, we're going to usually ask the lender to adjust your lender letter to be for the price that you're offering. So a lot of times when we ask for the initial lender letter, we're going to ask the lender to give it for your max. And the only reason we would ever send your max over to a potential seller is if for some reason we can't get a hold of your lender while you're making an offer. You're out looking at properties at 7 o'clock at night. You make a call saying, hey, I'm making an offer. They've already got multiple offers in. We got to move on this really fast. And the lender's at their daughter's soccer game and they're not returning your call till 10:30 at night. And you have to submit your offer as quickly as you can. In that case, with your approval, we'll go ahead and send over the lender letter with your max on it so that they know that you're qualified and you have a chance of getting the offer accepted. But most of the time, we're going to send it over with the exact price of your offer so that they know that you're approved for that. And then usually we'll include that with the offer via DocuSign. Earnest money, I'm going to do a whole class on earnest money, but right now you'll need this as soon as your offer is accepted. So you want to find out where you're getting it from and how you're going to get it, like especially if you keep low balances in certain accounts, you keep high balances in higher yield accounts, and those are less liquid. You'll want to make sure that you have enough for earnest money. Earnest money is typically about 1% of the purchase price. So if you're looking at $200,000 properties, it's typically about $2,000. If you're looking at $400,000, it's typically about $4,000. It can vary. So don't say, James told me it was this, it is this. Realize that some sellers will say, I want whatever it is. We've seen some really crazy ones lately too, where a buyer was like, we want, I don't know what it was, $30,000 non-refundable earnest money put up at the time of offer, some craziness like that. Yeah. And, it's up to you as to whether or not you want to negotiate that. But if you want a good shot of getting your offer accepted, as long as it's reasonable, I think that's something you probably should consider. Usually we'll use an alternative earnest money deadline. I'll talk about this in detail in the earnest money class. It can be a personal check in a lot of cases. And then once the offer is accepted, I'll coordinate getting the earnest money from you and getting it over to the earnest money holder, because usually it's not me holding your earnest money. It's going to be either the title company or the seller's brokerage. We talked about that. Earnest money, it usually counts towards your down payment. So you don't need earnest money and a down payment, and you definitely don't need earnest money, your down payments, and that success fee, because usually the success fee is paid out elsewhere. We talked about that earlier. So really it's just that earnest money which counts towards your down payment. And then is earnest money refundable? Maybe, maybe not. There are certain things you can object to or terminate the contract on. And if you terminate and you're under the guidelines that says you are allowed to object on that, in theory, you should be able to get your earnest money unless you did something in your contract that removes that right, or you give up the right to get your earnest money back, which you would probably know about. If you're working with me, you definitely would know. Because I would tell you, like I would say, hey, listen, are you sure you want to do this? Because if you don't do this, you're going to lose your earnest money. So in those cases, it probably is. But what if the seller says, no, I'm not really interested in giving you your earnest money back? Then you're going to have to go fight with the seller and get your earnest money back. You're probably bringing an attorney, or at least going to consulting with an attorney to see if you can get it back. It's not something your real estate agent's going to do. They're not like attorneys able to go and fight for your earnest money back for you like that. All right, so this is more of pre-showings. Down payment, you need to find out real estate financial planner down payment classes. There's a whole bunch of classes on this. You need to know where you're getting your down payment from. Are you getting a gift from your parents? Are you separately liquidating some stocks? Is it already in your savings accounts? Do you have an inventory from your Amazon business in your closets? Is it on your kitchen table? You want to say something, Brian? Okay, no. Just lean forward. So you'll need this when you need to close on the property. It's not something you'll need right away. Your earnest money you'll need sooner. So communicate with your lender about this early as to where you're getting it from so that they can source it. Because sometimes they need to document where it came from, and this could delay things. So make sure you do that. And if you're getting a gift from your parents, or you're giving a gift to your kids or your parents or grandparents or whatever it is, realize that your lender needs to know about that and you need to kind of take that into account. And then finally, before showings, usually for new clients, I like to do like a almost like a role play fake contract on a property. And sometimes it's after we've seen a property or two. We're like, okay, this one's sort of close. Let's go ahead and draft up a mock contract as if you were going to write an offer on this, so that you can do a run through and understand it and ask your attorney questions and ask your CPA questions and understand how the process works. That way, if you do see something that you really like and it's 7:30 at night and you're already fatigued and tired, you don't have to go and do that and learn the contract as well. You can do it ahead of time, have run through it, and now it's just like, let's talk about the differences between this one and the last one you did. So we talked about that, and these are some of the disclosures and addendums. There's a whole separate class on making offers. So realestatefinancialplanner.com, making offers classes, if you want to go access some of those. Talk about that. So then we talked about showings. There's an entire class on showings and looking at properties. We call it looking at houses. Realestatefinancialplanner.com, excuse me. Looking at properties classes. So there's 2 hours of deep dive on everything from, going into the property and what you look at, how you act in the property, what we do outside, what we do inside, what you do before you write an offer. Like all that stuff is covered in these classes. And we go into some pretty good detail on that, 2 hours worth of there. Then let's talk about writing an offer. Entire 2 hour plus classes on making offers. You're laughing because it's like everything is a 2 hour class, so I don't have to reteach it. And that's why this class is the way it is.
Yep.
So there's a whole 2 hour plus class on writing offers. You guys are going to do that. And recently, we just taught a class on contract to close. So I don't really need to teach that again tonight. So go watch the contract to close class we just did at realestatefinancialplanner.com, contract to close classes. There's a whole class I did on closings, I think. And so we cover this in the closing real estate deals class. So that's realestatefinancialplanner.com/closing classes. And then post-closing. This is the last slide, I think, for tonight. And this is all the stuff that your real estate agent should be doing with you after you buy a house with them or after you sell a house. So in my opinion, the relationship with your real estate agent should not end with the closing itself. In my opinion, your real estate agent should be getting together with you and, looking at your real estate, determining, what properties are worth. What are you thinking about doing with them? Are you thinking about selling them? Are you thinking about refinancing them? Are you going to leverage up? Are you going to, reallocate, return on equity calculations? All that stuff that your real estate agent should be doing with you. I think that's part of the ongoing process with clients that are still active. I think that if a client has moved on and used other agents between the last transaction you had, I feel that is probably not something I would pursue, but some agents may feel like they want to. Referral directory, if you need a contractor, handyman, plumber, electrician, inspector, roofer, insurance agent, I think going to your real estate agent who is actively, referring people and having clients use and do stuff, I think that's a good center of influence to find out who is a good guy for that. And I think that your agent should be providing you some type of referral directory to be able to do that. And then changes in market conditions that affect your real estate, any months of inventory changes, changes in interest rates where you should consider refinancing, rental market changes if we're noticing the rental market is softening. Some of the stuff Brian did at the beginning of class where he's starting to talk about what's happening with property management and vacancy and all that stuff. That's part of my ongoing effort to keep you educated. Brian just happens to do it because he loves doing this stuff. But if he wasn't doing it, I probably would do something similar. So just realize that. Rental comps, being able to find out what rental comps are or use your property manager. And then releases and related paperwork. I think that your real estate agent should be providing you some of those paperwork things. And then classes on various real estate topics, for nomads and other stuff. There's a reason we do all these classes. It's to continue to educate clients and potential clients and then answer to your real estate questions. Any final questions? Look at that timing. 3 minutes to go, and we have time for questions. Kind of like a heavily bulleted class overview process craziness stuff.
The class where 2/7 of the class takes 95% of the time. And then the last 5/7 is 5 minutes long.
Yeah, because it's like there's a 2 hour class on this, there's a 2 hour class on this, there's 4 hours on this, there's 2 hours on this, there's 2 hours on this. And that's really the thing, right? It's like I'm not going to reteach closings because we spent 2 hours on closings 3 weeks ago, 4 weeks ago, whenever it was.
Yeah.
So that's why.
Apparently there's no questions for you.
Nice. I love it. It seemed like there were a lot of discussions going on, but maybe they were all off topic or something.
They were a little off topic, yeah.
Okay, no worries. Awesome. Well, cool. Well, I don't have anything for you. And I think I've got some stuff I need to take care of. So I don't know if I'm hanging out tonight. Are you hanging out? Yeah,
Nope.
Brian's not hanging out either. So if we don't have any questions, this is your last chance for questions. We will not be doing like a class after the class networking session. We do appreciate you all coming on, and you can save all your questions for the Ask Me Almost Anything class coming up in 2 weeks or 3 weeks. Save all those, write them down, and we will go ahead and cover those in detail and stuff. You guys are very, very welcome. You've most classes mentioned. I'm not sure what that means.
The most classes ever mentioned in a class.
Oh,
Classes.
it's probably close.
It's like an award.
It is. It is an award. Yeah, you're very, very welcome, guys. Thanks all for coming on. We do appreciate it. That's it, Ryan. Unless you have anything else, I'm going to stop the recording, provided I did record it tonight.
Awesome. Sounds good. See you guys later.
You guys are very welcome. I'll talk to you all soon. Bye-bye for now.